The desert wind carried dust through the broken windows of the old Mesa County courthouse that morning. Dust that settled on everything. The wooden benches worn smooth by decades of desperate men seeking justice, the faded American flag hanging crooked behind the judge's bench, and the boots of every soul packed into that sweltering room. The year was 1883, and truth was a commodity rarer than water in those parts. My name is Samuel Kane. For 15 years, I wore the badge of a lawman in 3 territories, and I learned one absolute truth. Justice and the law aren't always the same thing. That morning I stood accused of a crime I didn't commit, but in the West your word meant nothing without proof, and proof was something I didn't have. All I had was my reputation, my determination, and Duke, my German Shepherd police dog, trained in the Colorado mountains, loyal beyond any human I'd ever known. Duke sat beside me at the defendant's table, his amber eyes fixed on every movement in that courtroom. He wasn't just a dog. He was my deputy, my partner, my witness. In 12 years together, we'd tracked outlaws across frozen mountain passes, found missing children in canyon lands where hope had died, and brought justice to places where the law had forgotten to look. But that day, we were the ones on trial. The story of how Duke and I became partners began in the winter of 1871, in the mountains above Denver. I was a young deputy then, barely 23, full of idealism and short on experience. The territorial marshal had acquired a litter of German Shepherd puppies from a breeder in St. Louis, dogs bred specifically for police work, a concept so new that most lawmen laughed at it. They couldn't imagine a dog being useful for anything beyond guarding property or hunting game. But I saw something different in those puppies. One in particular caught my attention, the runt of the litter, smaller than his brothers and sisters, but with eyes that seemed to understand more than any animal should. While the other puppies played and tumbled over each other, this one sat and watched, studied, learned. I named him Duke, after the Duke of Wellington, because even as a puppy he carried himself with dignity and purpose. Training Duke was the hardest thing I'd ever done. It required patience I didn't know I possessed, consistency when I wanted to give up, and faith that this small creature could become what I envisioned. We started with simple commands: sit, stay, come. But Duke learned so quickly that within weeks we'd moved to complex tasks, tracking scents across varied terrain, identifying specific smells among dozens of competing odors, distinguishing between friend and foe based on subtle cues I couldn't even perceive. The other deputies mocked me. They said I was wasting time, that I should be out enforcing the law instead of playing with a pet. But the marshal, a grizzled veteran named Jacob Thornton, who'd seen everything the West could throw at a man, defended my work. He'd seen police dogs in action during his time in the Army, and he believed in their potential. Our first real case together came when Duke was just 18 months old. A child had gone missing in the mountain wilderness above Boulder, a 6-year-old girl who'd wandered away from her family's cabin during a snowstorm. Search parties had been looking for 3 days without success. The temperature was dropping. Time was running out. I arrived with Duke, and the girl's father looked at me with desperate hope, turning to disappointment when he saw I'd brought a dog instead of more men. But I explained what Duke could do, and desperation overcame skepticism. The father gave me the girl's favorite blanket, and Duke buried his nose in it, learning her scent, imprinting it in his remarkable memory. Then we set off into the wilderness. The snow was deep, the wind brutal, visibility nearly zero. Human searchers couldn't work in those conditions. But Duke's nose wasn't affected by snow or wind. He pulled me forward through drifts that came up to my chest, following a trail invisible to everyone else. For 6 hours we pushed through that frozen hell, and just when I thought even Duke's determination would fail, he stopped and began digging frantically at a snowbank. We found her there, hypothermic but alive, sheltered in a hollow beneath a fallen pine tree. Duke lay down beside her, sharing his body heat while I carried her back to civilization. That night, the father who'd doubted me knelt in the snow and embraced Duke, tears freezing on his face. The story spread through Colorado territory like wildfire. The skeptics became believers. Over the next decade, Duke and I built a reputation. We weren't just a lawman and his dog. We were a team, each compensating for the other's weaknesses, amplifying each other's strengths. I provided human reasoning, understanding of law and society, the ability to interrogate witnesses and analyze evidence. Duke provided instincts honed by millions of years of evolution, senses far beyond human capability, and a loyalty that never wavered regardless of danger or hardship. We tracked the Dalton gang through 3 states, finding them holed up in a canyon in Utah where they thought no one could follow. We recovered stolen payrolls, found hidden weapons caches, and brought dozens of outlaws to justice. Duke saved my life on at least 7 occasions that I can count, once pulling me out of quicksand, twice alerting me to ambushes, and 4 times attacking armed men who would have killed me without his intervention. But our partnership was more than professional. Duke was my confidant in a lonely profession. When I sat by campfires in the wilderness, processing the violence I'd witnessed, Duke would rest his head on my knee, a silent reminder that goodness still existed in a brutal world. When I doubted my choices, questioned whether I was making a difference, Duke's unwavering dedication reminded me why the work mattered. If you're captivated by this bond between lawman and loyal companion, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a partnership that transcended words, built on pure trust and mutual respect? Your engagement helps keep these stories of courage and dedication alive. By 1883, Duke and I had become something of a legend in the Western Territories, which is why when the Wells Fargo Company needed an escort for a valuable gold shipment from the mining town of Silver Creek to the railroad depot in Santa Fe, they specifically requested us. $5,000 in refined ore, the consolidated output of 3 months' work from a dozen small mining operations. It represented life savings, business investments, dreams of prosperity for families who'd risked everything on the promise of the West. The stage left Silver Creek on a Tuesday morning in late September. The autumn air was crisp and clear, the kind of perfect weather that makes you believe nothing bad could happen. I rode up top with the driver, a weathered man named Jack Sullivan who'd been running stages for 20 years. Duke sat beside me, alert and watchful. Inside the coach were 3 passengers: Harold Jenkins, a traveling salesman with a case full of mining equipment samples; Martha Whitmore, a widow returning east after burying her husband; and Silas Mather, a prospector who'd struck it rich and was heading home to Ohio. The gold was locked in a reinforced strongbox beneath the driver's seat, secured with chains and a lock that supposedly couldn't be picked. Sullivan and I had both checked it before departure. Everything seemed routine, professional, secure. We made good time through the morning, stopping at a relay station for fresh horses around noon. Duke investigated the area while the horses were being changed, his nose working constantly, but he indicated nothing unusual. We ate a quick meal of beans and hardtack, then continued south toward Copper Ridge Pass. That's where everything went wrong. Copper Ridge Pass was a natural choke point, the only practical route through a stretch of badlands carved by ancient rivers. High rock walls on both sides, the trail narrowing to barely enough room for the stage to pass. It was the perfect place for an ambush, which is why stages normally traveled through in groups for safety. But Wells Fargo had insisted on discretion for this shipment. No one was supposed to know about the gold except a handful of trusted individuals. Someone knew. They came out of the rocks like ghosts materializing from stone. 6 riders, faces covered with bandanas, armed with rifles and revolvers. Military precision in their positioning, 3 on each side, high ground advantage, clear fields of fire. These weren't desperate outlaws making a reckless grab. These were professionals who'd planned every detail. The first shot killed Sullivan instantly. The bullet struck him in the chest, and he toppled backward off the driver's seat before I could even draw my weapon. The horses panicked, rearing and screaming. Inside the coach, the passengers were shouting in terror. I returned fire, aiming at the closest rider. My shot caught him in the shoulder and he spun in his saddle, nearly falling before catching himself. But the others had already opened fire, bullets splintering the wood around me, one grazing my left arm, another punching through my hat. Duke didn't wait for commands. He launched himself at the lead rider, a massive man on a black horse who seemed to be directing the others. 100 pounds of muscle and fury, Duke hit the horse's flank and it reared, trying to throw the rider. The man cursed and tried to aim his rifle at Duke, but my loyal partner was too fast, darting beneath the horse, forcing it to dance away from the stage. That's when I saw another rider coming at Duke with a knife, a long blade that gleamed in the afternoon sun. I shouted a warning, but Duke was already engaging the horse and couldn't evade. The blade came down, slashing across his left shoulder. Blood sprayed crimson against his dark fur. Duke yelped, but didn't retreat. Even wounded, he kept attacking, kept fighting, kept protecting me and the passengers. The leader fired a shot near Duke's head, not trying to hit him but to drive him back. The blast stunned Duke momentarily, and I used that moment to grab him, pulling him up onto the driver's seat with me. His blood soaked through my shirt as I held him, returning fire with my other hand. But we were outnumbered and outpositioned. The bandits knew it. They'd killed the driver, wounded me, neutralized Duke. Now they moved in with confidence, surrounding the stage. One of them climbed up and held a gun to my head. "Don't be a hero, lawman," he said. His voice was educated, cultured, not the rough growl of a frontier outlaw. "Drop the weapon, or I drop you." I had no choice. My pistol fell to the dusty ground. Another bandit retrieved it while a third produced dynamite and placed it beneath the strongbox. The passengers were pulled from the coach, made to lie face down in the dirt. Martha Whitmore was crying. Silas Mather was praying. Harold Jenkins just stared at nothing in shock. The explosion was deafening in the narrow confines of the pass. The strongbox split open like an overripe fruit, gold ore spilling out. The bandits loaded it quickly into saddlebags, working with practiced efficiency. The whole operation took less than 10 minutes from first shot to final departure. Before they left, the leader walked over to where I lay, still holding Duke. He looked down at us with cold eyes visible above his bandana. "This was business, lawman. Nothing personal. You put up a good fight. The dog, too. But you were on the wrong side of this one." Then he shot me. The bullet hit my left thigh, shattering the bone. I screamed and nearly lost consciousness from the pain. Duke tried to rise to protect me, even while wounded himself, but he was too weak from blood loss. The bandits rode west toward the Black Rock Canyons, disappearing into the maze of stone as if they'd never existed. I don't remember much of what happened next. Pain, thirst, the sun beating down like a hammer. Duke lying beside me, his breathing shallow, his blood mixing with mine in the dust. The passengers, I learned later they'd been marched at gunpoint 5 miles away and left tied up. They survived, but by the time they freed themselves and brought help, critical hours had been lost. At some point, I don't know when, I realized Duke was moving. Despite his wound, despite his exhaustion, he was trying to drag me. His teeth gripped my belt and he pulled inch by inch, moving my 200 pounds through the dirt. He was trying to get me to the relay station, 8 miles back the way we'd come. I tried to stop him, tried to tell him to save his strength, but he wouldn't listen. He pulled and rested, making agonizingly slow progress. My leg left a trail of blood in the dust. Duke's shoulder opened wider with every effort, but he wouldn't quit. Couldn't quit. It wasn't in his nature to abandon his partner. We made it 2 miles before a patrol from the relay station found us. They'd heard the explosion and sent riders to investigate. When they saw us, a wounded lawman and his dog, both more dead than alive, they later said it was the most heartbreaking thing they'd ever witnessed. Duke still trying to pull me, still trying to save me. Even when help arrived, he wouldn't let go of my belt until he collapsed from exhaustion. We spent 3 weeks in the doctor's office in Silver Creek. My leg was shattered, but the doctor managed to save it. I'd walk with a limp for the rest of my life, but I'd walk. Duke's wound was deep but clean. The knife had missed major blood vessels by a fraction of an inch. We healed slowly, side by side, two warriors recovering from battle. During those weeks, the investigation into the robbery went nowhere. Sheriff Benjamin Morrison searched the Black Rock canyons but found nothing. The bandits had vanished. The gold was gone. The only evidence was my testimony, which couldn't identify any of the masked men, and a piece of torn fabric I'd managed to recover from the scene. A scrap of fine wool cloth caught on a sharp rock where one of the bandits had scraped past. Morrison was sympathetic, but helpless. Without witnesses who can identify them, without the stolen property, there's nothing I can do, Sam, I'm sorry. But someone else wasn't sympathetic. Judge Cornelius Blackwood, the territorial judge who presided over Old Mesa County, began asking questions. Why had I survived when the driver died? Why hadn't I pursued the bandits immediately? Where had I really been during those hours before the patrol found me? His questions had an edge, an implicit accusation that made me uneasy. Then, 6 weeks after the robbery, I was arrested, charged with conspiracy to steal the gold shipment. The evidence against me was circumstantial but damning in its accumulation. I'd been the only lawman on the stage. I'd survived while others died. The bandits had known exactly when and where to strike, information only a few people possessed. And I couldn't produce the gold or identify the thieves. The prosecution theory was simple. I'd staged the robbery, hidden the gold, and planned to collect it later. My wound was self-inflicted misdirection. Duke's injury was collateral damage I'd been willing to accept for a $5,000 payoff. If you're invested in this story of injustice and the fight for truth, please subscribe to this channel and leave a comment. Have you ever been wrongly accused? Have you ever had to prove your innocence when the evidence seemed to point against you? Your engagement keeps these important stories alive and reminds us why truth matters. The trial was set for late November in the Old Mesa County courthouse. My lawyer was William Price, a young attorney fresh from law school in St. Louis, idealistic and inexperienced but honest. He believed in my innocence, but belief wasn't evidence. "They're going to convict you," William told me during one of his jail visits. Duke sat beside me in the cell. Sheriff Morrison had allowed it, one of the few kindnesses I received. "Unless we find something concrete, some proof that contradicts their narrative, that jury will send you to prison." "Then we find proof," I said, scratching Duke's ears. His wound had healed, leaving a long scar on his shoulder. "We've done it before." "This is different, Sam. We're not investigating a crime. We're defending against an accusation. And the judge—" William hesitated. "Judge Blackwood has a reputation. He's powerful, connected, and he doesn't lose cases he cares about. For some reason, he cares very much about convicting you." That statement lodged in my mind like a splinter. Why would a territorial judge care so deeply about a robbery case? Blackwood had presided over dozens of criminal trials. What made mine special? I spent the next 3 weeks in that jail cell, reviewing every detail of the robbery in my mind. Duke seemed to sense my frustration. He'd rest his head on my knee and look up at me with those amber eyes, and I'd remember what we'd been through together. All the cases we'd solved, all the times we'd uncovered truth when everyone else had given up. The day of the trial arrived with typical Western drama. The courthouse was packed, standing room only. Everyone in Old Mesa County wanted to see the famous lawman Samuel Kane brought low. Some came hoping for my vindication. Others came for the spectacle of watching a hero fall. Judge Cornelius Blackwood presided over the proceedings with the kind of arrogance that only comes from absolute power in a lawless land. He was a massive man, 300 pounds of self-importance squeezed into a black suit that had seen better days. His face was red from whiskey and rage, his eyes small and cruel beneath bushy gray eyebrows. When he looked at me, he didn't see a lawman who'd served with honor. He saw an obstacle. The charges were read: conspiracy to commit robbery, theft of property exceeding $1,000, dereliction of duty. Each charge carried years of prison time. Combined, they could put me away for the rest of my life. The prosecuting attorney was a snake named Elias Thorne, brought in special from Santa Fe. He wore a gray suit and a thin mustache that twitched when he lied, which was constantly. He paced before the jury. 12 men who looked at me with suspicion and looked at Judge Blackwood with fear. "Gentlemen of the jury," Thorne began, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "We have before us a simple case. A lawman sworn to protect becomes a thief. Samuel Kane was the only armed guard on that stage. The gold disappeared. He survived with convenient injuries. And now he stands before you, pretending innocence while good people have lost their life savings." Duke growled low in his throat. He could sense lies the way other dogs sense rabbits. I placed my hand on his head, feeling his powerful muscles tense beneath my palm. "Easy, boy," I whispered. "Not yet." Judge Blackwood leaned forward, his chair creaking ominously beneath his weight. "Control that animal, Kane, or I'll have it removed from my courtroom." "He's a sworn deputy, Your Honor," I said evenly. "He has every right to be here." Blackwood's face purpled. "A dog? A deputy?" He laughed, a harsh mocking sound that echoed through the courthouse. Several of the townspeople laughed with him, nervous laughter, the kind that comes from people afraid not to join in. "You've lost your mind along with Your Honor, Kane. That mangy beast is no more a deputy than I'm the King of England." The insult burned, but I held my tongue. In the West, a man's pride could get him killed, but controlled anger could keep him alive. I'd learned that lesson young, watching my father die in a gunfight over words that didn't matter. Duke, however, didn't understand courtroom protocol. He stood, hackles raised, a deep rumble emanating from his chest. "See?" Blackwood gestured broadly. "The animal is dangerous. Bailiff, remove it immediately." "No." My voice cut through the room like a knife. Every eye turned to me. "Duke stays. He's evidence. He was there during the robbery. He fought those bandits. He took a knife. When protecting that gold shipment." I reached down and carefully parted the fur on Duke's left shoulder, revealing the long, healed scar, evidence the prosecution had conveniently ignored. Young William Price stood quickly, sensing an opening. "Your Honor, if I may, the dog's injury corroborates my client's testimony. This wound is consistent with a knife attack, not something that could be self-inflicted." Thorne scoffed. "A dog could be injured 100 ways. Perhaps Kane cut his own animal to fabricate evidence. After all, we're dealing with a man desperate enough to stage a robbery. Wounding his dog wouldn't be beyond him." The suggestion made my blood boil. To even imply I would harm Duke showed how little these men understood about loyalty, about partnership, about the bond between a lawman and his deputy, regardless of species. I half rose from my chair, but William's hand on my shoulder stopped me. "Let them talk," William whispered urgently. "Don't give them a reason to hold you in contempt." Judge Blackwood waved his hand dismissively. "The dog stays for now, but one more outburst and it's removed. Continue, Mr. Thorne." Thorne turned to face the jury, composing himself for maximum dramatic effect. "Let us examine the facts of this case, gentlemen. On September 24th of this year, a Wells Fargo stage departed Silver Creek carrying $5,000 in gold ore. Samuel Kane was hired as the armed escort. He was specifically requested because of his reputation." Thorne paused, letting irony hang in the air. "Because he was trusted." He paced slowly, measuring his words. "The stage was attacked at Copper Ridge Pass. The driver was killed. Kane was wounded. The gold was stolen. 6 masked bandits, Kane claims, though no other witnesses saw these mysterious riders. Just Kane. Convenient, wouldn't you say?" "The passengers saw them," William interjected. "They testified in the preliminary hearing. They testified they saw riders. Masked riders. They couldn't identify anyone. And where were these passengers during the actual robbery? According to their statements, they were made to lie face down in the dirt, unable to see what was happening. For all they know, Kane staged the entire event." Thorne approached the jury box, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Consider this. How did the bandits know about the gold shipment? Wells Fargo kept it secret. Only 5 people knew the details: the company manager, the sheriff, the judge, who authorized transport, Kane himself, and the driver who's conveniently dead. Someone leaked that information. Someone told the bandits exactly when and where to strike. He wheeled dramatically, pointing at me. Kane was wounded in the leg. A painful injury, certainly, but not immediately fatal. Not even immediately incapacitating. Yet he claims he couldn't pursue the bandits. He lay in the dirt for hours while they escaped. He made no attempt to track them, to identify them, to recover the stolen property. Why? Because he was shot, William protested. His femur was shattered. He could barely move. Or because there was nothing to pursue, Thorne countered smoothly. Because he already knew where the gold was. Because he'd hidden it himself and planned to collect it later, after the investigation cooled, after suspicion faded. The jury was listening intently now, their faces showing the doubt Thorne was expertly cultivating. And then there's the matter of timing, Thorne continued. Kane spent 3 weeks recovering in Silver Creek. Plenty of time to sneak out, retrieve the gold, and relocate it somewhere safer. Plenty of time to coordinate with his accomplices, whoever they might be. That's absurd, I said, unable to contain myself. I was barely able to walk. The doctor had me on laudanum for the pain. I couldn't have. Order. Blackwood hammered his gavel. The defendant will remain silent unless called to testify. One more outburst, Kane, and you'll be gagged. William touched my arm, urging restraint. But the injustice of it all was overwhelming. I'd nearly died protecting that gold. Duke had nearly died. And now we were being painted as criminals, our sacrifice twisted into evidence of guilt. Thorne wasn't finished. He called witnesses one after another, each adding another layer to the prosecution's case. Mrs. Henderson, a shopkeeper in Silver Creek, testified that I'd asked unusual questions about the gold shipment's timing the week before the robbery. Tom Brewster, a saloon owner, claimed I'd been drinking heavily in the days leading up to the escort job. A complete fabrication, as I'd been on duty and sober the entire time. Deputy Marshal Frank Clemens testified about my financial situation. Kane's been living on a deputy's salary for 15 years, barely scraping by. He's got no savings, no property, nothing to show for all those years of service. A man in that situation might be tempted by easy money. Or a man in that situation might simply be honest, William countered during cross-examination. Perhaps Deputy Kane's lack of wealth speaks to his integrity, not his desperation. But Clemens shook his head. Or maybe he was just waiting for the right opportunity. Each witness felt rehearsed, their testimonies too smooth, too perfectly aligned with the prosecution's narrative. I watched them carefully, looking for tells, for hesitation, for any sign of the truth beneath the lies, and slowly, a pattern emerged. They were all afraid. Every single witness glanced at Judge Blackwood before answering key questions. Mrs. Henderson's hands trembled when Thorne asked about my supposed questions. Tom Brewster couldn't meet my eyes. Frank Clemens kept wiping his palms on his pants. These weren't people testifying from conviction. These were people testifying from fear. During a brief recess, I shared my observation with William. Duke sat between us in the small witness room, his eyes scanning the hallway outside. They're being coerced, I said. Someone's forcing them to lie. William nodded slowly. I suspect the same thing. But suspicion isn't proof. We need evidence that someone's manipulating these witnesses. Blackwood, I said. It has to be him. He owns half the businesses in this county. Most of those witnesses work for him directly or indirectly. He could ruin them with a word. But why? William asked. Why would a territorial judge risk his reputation to convict you? What does he gain? That was the question I couldn't answer. Yet. But I was beginning to form a theory, one so audacious I almost didn't believe it myself. What if Blackwood wasn't trying to convict me? What if he was trying to bury the investigation? If I went to prison for the robbery, the case would be closed. No one would keep looking for the real bandits. No one would search for the gold. The trail would go cold, and whoever had the gold could sit on it safely, waiting years if necessary before gradually selling it off. But if that was true, it meant Blackwood was involved in the robbery itself. It meant a territorial judge had orchestrated the theft of $5,000 and was now using his position to cover his tracks. It was a conspiracy that went deeper than I'd imagined, more dangerous than any outlaw gang I'd ever faced. If this story resonates with you, this fight against corruption, this refusal to surrender to injustice, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a system that seemed rigged against you? Your engagement matters, and these stories of courage need to be told and remembered. When court resumed, it was the defense's turn. William called me to the stand, and I swore on a Bible worn thin by the lies told upon it. I told my story clearly, without embellishment, because the truth needs no decoration. "Mr. Kane," William began, "please tell the court about your career as a lawman." "I've served for 15 years, I said. "Started as a deputy in Colorado Territory, worked my way up to federal marshal. Duke and I have been partners for 12 years. Together we've made over 200 arrests, recovered stolen property worth tens of thousands of dollars, and saved lives. That's not speculation. That's documented record." "Have you ever been accused of dishonesty or corruption?" "Never. Not once in 15 years. "Have you ever been disciplined for any reason?" "No, sir." William walked me through the day of the robbery, having me describe every detail: the passengers, the route, the attack, the professional precision of the bandits, Duke's brave defense and subsequent injury, my own wound and the agonizing hours afterward. "Why didn't you pursue the bandits immediately?" William asked, getting ahead of the prosecution's questions. "I couldn't walk, sir. My leg was shattered. Even crawling was nearly impossible. Duke, despite his own injury, tried to drag me to safety. Without his efforts, I would have died in that pass." "Did you know about the gold shipment before being hired to escort it?" "Not specifically. Wells Fargo contacted me 2 days before departure and asked if I was available. They told me it was a valuable shipment and they wanted someone reliable. I agreed because that's my job." "Did you tell anyone about the shipment?" "Only Duke," I said, which got a small ripple of laughter from the courtroom. I didn't know the exact amount or the specific timing until the morning of departure. There was no opportunity to leak that information, and no reason I would. William picked up the piece of torn fabric I'd recovered from the scene. "Can you tell the court about this evidence?" "I found it caught on a rock in Copper Ridge Pass where one of the bandits had scraped past. It's fine wool, expensive material, not the kind of thing common outlaws wear. It suggests whoever planned this robbery had money, education, connections." "What else did you notice about the bandits?" "Their boots. All 6 wore the same style, cavalry boots, military issue, and they moved with military precision. Formations, coordinated fire, tactical positioning. These weren't ordinary criminals, they were trained." Thorne objected. "Speculation. The defendant has no way of knowing their backgrounds." "I served 2 years in the cavalry before becoming a lawman," I responded. "I know military tactics when I see them." Judge Blackwood leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously. "I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Price." William asked about my financial situation, having me confirm that I lived modestly on a deputy's salary. "If you'd stolen $5,000 in gold, where would you have hidden it?" "I wouldn't have stolen it in the first place," I said firmly. "But hypothetically, I suppose someone would need a secure location, probably remote, where they could store it without suspicion. Somewhere they controlled, completely. Do you have such a location?" "I rent a room above the livery stable. The owner can confirm I have no storage space, no private property, nowhere to hide that amount of gold." The cross-examination was brutal. Thorne attacked every aspect of my testimony, trying to find contradictions to shake my story. But I'd told the truth, and the truth is consistent. He couldn't trip me up because I wasn't lying. Finally, frustrated, Thorne played his trump card. "Mr. Kane, how much do you earn annually as a deputy marshal?" "About $800. And how much was the stolen gold worth? $5,000. So more than 6 years of your salary, stolen in one day. You expect this jury to believe you wouldn't be tempted by that kind of money? I expect this jury to look at my 15-year record and decide whether I'm the kind of man who would throw away my career, my honor, and my freedom for any amount of money. Easy to say now when you're on trial. I've said it my entire career. My reputation speaks for itself. Thorne turned to the jury. Or perhaps your reputation is exactly what you were banking on. The famous Samuel Kane, above suspicion. The perfect inside man for a robbery. William called other witnesses in my defense. Former colleagues who testified to my character. The relay station manager who described finding Duke trying to drag my wounded body through the desert. The doctor who treated my injuries and confirmed they were serious and genuine. But none of it seemed to move the jury. They sat stone-faced, already convinced, just waiting for the formality of deliberation. The afternoon was wearing on, the courthouse growing stuffy and hot. Flies buzzed against the windows. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight. And I realized with sick certainty that I was going to be convicted. Despite the truth. Despite my years of service. Despite everything Duke and I had accomplished together. Blackwood called for a brief recess. Before closing arguments, people filed out to stretch their legs, to smoke, to gossip about the trial. I remained at the defendant's table, Duke beside me, both of us exhausted from the ordeal. William sat down heavily. "I'm sorry, Sam. I've done everything I can think of." "You've done well," I said. "This isn't on you. It's on whoever's rigged this trial." "You really believe it's the judge?" "I know it is. I can't prove it yet. But I know." Duke's ears suddenly perked up. He lifted his head, sniffing the air with intense concentration. Something had caught his attention, some scent that meant something to him. I watched him carefully, recognizing the behavior. He was tracking. "Duke, what is it, boy?" He stood and moved toward the front of the courtroom, nose working steadily. People were starting to filter back in for the closing arguments, but Duke ignored them, focused entirely on following whatever scent trail he'd detected. And then I understood. During my testimony, I'd mentioned the torn fabric, the fine wool that suggested wealth and education. That scent was in the courthouse. Duke had picked it up. Someone in this room had been at that robbery. My heart began pounding. This was it, the break we needed. But how to use it? Blackwood would never allow Duke to conduct a search during the trial. If I made a scene, I'd be held in contempt and Duke would be removed. I needed to be subtle, to let Duke work while appearing to simply control him. "Duke, heel," I said, quietly. He glanced back at me, torn between obedience and the trail. "Easy, boy. Slow. Show me." We had a system for this, developed over years of working together. When we needed to track discreetly, Duke would move casually, appearing to simply accompany me while actually following a scent. His nose never stopped working, but to a casual observer, he just looked like a dog walking with his master. Duke moved along the side of the courtroom, pausing occasionally to verify the scent. William watched, confused but smart enough not to question what I was doing. We passed the jury box. Duke showed no interest. We moved past the spectator benches where townspeople were settling back into their seats. Nothing. Then Duke's body language changed. His muscles tensed. His tail went rigid. His nose pointed directly toward the front of the courtroom, toward the prosecution table where Elias Thorne was organizing his papers for closing arguments. Duke took another step forward, then another. The scent was stronger now, more concentrated. He moved past Thorne's table. The prosecutor stepped back nervously, clearly uncomfortable with a large dog approaching, and continued toward the judge's bench, toward Judge Cornelius Blackwood himself. Duke circled behind the elevated platform where Blackwood sat, his nose working frantically now. Then he stopped, looked back at me, and sat. The unmistakable signal that he'd found what he was tracking. His eyes locked on mine, communicating what words never could, The scent from the robbery scene, the scent from that torn piece of expensive wool fabric was concentrated right here, right behind Judge Blackwood's chair. "Get that animal away from my bench," Blackwood roared, his face flushing crimson. "This is contempt of court. Bailiff, remove that dog immediately." But I'd seen Duke work too many times to doubt him now. "Your Honor," I said loudly, projecting my voice so everyone could hear. "Duke is a trained tracking and detection dog. He's indicating something behind your bench, something related to the robbery." The courtroom erupted in whispers. People leaned forward, craning their necks to see. The jury members looked at each other with confusion and growing interest. "This is absurd," Blackwood sputtered. "This is a desperate ploy by a guilty man. There's nothing behind my bench except—" "Except what, Your Honor?" William Price had found his courage, his young voice cutting through the commotion. "If there's nothing there, then surely you won't mind if we verify that? After all, if Kane is guilty, this will only further demonstrate his desperation." Blackwood was trapped by his own arrogance. To refuse would make him look guilty. To allow it would risk exposure. His small eyes darted around the courtroom, looking for an escape that didn't exist. "Fine," he spat. "Bailiff Carson, check behind the bench. And when you find nothing, I'm holding both Kane and his lawyer in contempt." Carson, the weathered bailiff who'd seen everything in his 30 years of courthouse duty, moved slowly toward the judge's platform. He was a careful man, deliberate, the kind who'd survived the frontier by thinking before acting. He knelt behind Blackwood's chair, examining the floor. "There's a gap here, Judge," Carson said, his voice carrying clearly in the silent courtroom. "Between the floorboards, looks like the plank's been pried up and replaced." "That proves nothing." Thorne jumped to his feet. "Old buildings have loose floorboards. This courthouse was built in 1869. The wood has settled." But Carson was already working at the plank with his knife, prying it upward. The wood came free easily, far too easily for a board that should have been nailed down 14 years ago. Carson set it aside and reached into the gap beneath. When he stood, he held a canvas bag, heavy, clinking with unmistakable metallic sound. The courtroom held its collective breath. Carson opened the bag with trembling. Hands and gold ore spilled onto the judge's desk, refined pieces that caught the afternoon light and threw it back in shimmering reflections. The same gold that had been stolen from the Wells Fargo stage, the same gold I'd been accused of taking. Hidden beneath Judge Cornelius Blackwood's chair, where he'd sat every day of this trial, dispensing justice while literally sitting on stolen property. The silence that followed was more thunderous than any explosion. Every eye in the courthouse fixed on Blackwood. His face had gone from red to white, from arrogant authority to cornered animal. "That's not," he began. "Someone planted that. Kane must have—" "I've been in jail for 3 weeks, Your Honor," I said calmly. "Under constant guard. I had no access to this courtroom, no opportunity to plant anything anywhere." I looked at the jury, at the townspeople, at everyone who'd come to watch my conviction. "But you've been sitting in that chair every day. That gold has been under you this entire time." The courtroom exploded, people shouting, jumping to their feet, the bailiff trying to restore order. But order was beyond restoration now. The truth had surfaced like water in the desert, and it changed everything. Duke hadn't moved from his sitting position behind the bench. Even amid the chaos, he maintained his training, his discipline, his duty. He'd found what he was looking for, and now he waited for me to acknowledge his work. "Good boy," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Good boy, Duke." But Duke's nose was still working. His attention shifted slightly, focused now on something else. He stood and moved toward the corner of the courtroom where Elias Thorne had been sitting. The prosecutor had backed away during the commotion, pressed against the wall, his face a mask of panic. Duke approached Thorne's briefcase, sitting on the floor beside the prosecution table. He sniffed it carefully, then sat again. Another indication. William Price, emboldened by the first discovery, strode over and grabbed the briefcase before anyone could stop him. "Do you object to me examining this, Mr. Thorne?" Thorne's silence was answer enough. William opened the case and began removing papers, searching through the contents while the entire courtroom watched. Near the bottom, beneath legal documents and case notes, he found another canvas bag, smaller than the first, but identical in style. More gold ore. And beneath that, a jacket. Gray wool, expensive material. With a tear at the right shoulder, the fabric edges matching perfectly the scrap I'd recovered from Copper Ridge Pass. The final piece fell into place. Thorne hadn't just been prosecuting me. He'd been one of the bandits. The educated voice I'd heard giving orders during the robbery. The professional precision. The military tactics. Elias Thorne, attorney at law, was also an outlaw who'd helped steal $5,000 in gold. Thorne ran. He bolted for the courthouse door, shoving people aside in his panic. But 3 jurors blocked his path, men who'd been prepared to convict me an hour ago but now saw the truth. They grabbed Thorne, held him despite his struggles, and when Sheriff Morrison finally regained control of the situation, it was to arrest the prosecutor instead of the defendant. Judge Blackwood tried to assert his authority, bellowing orders, demanding that everyone be held in contempt. But his voice was drowned out by the crowd that had tolerated his corruption for too long. These were men and women who'd seen their neighbors convicted in rigged trials, who'd paid bribes disguised as legal fees, who'd lived under Blackwood's thumb and never dared to speak against him. Until now. Sheriff Morrison, a decent man who'd been too intimidated to act against Blackwood before, finally found his backbone. He drew his weapon and pointed it at the judge. "Cornelius Blackwood, you're under arrest for robbery, conspiracy, corruption, and obstruction of justice." "You can't arrest me," Blackwood roared. "I'm a territorial judge. I have immunity." "Not for robbery, you don't," Morrison said. "Not for any of this. Your immunity doesn't cover criminal acts." As Morrison placed Blackwood in irons, the supreme irony of a judge being shackled in his own courtroom, I knelt beside Duke and embraced him. This magnificent partner, this loyal deputy, had done what I couldn't. He'd found the evidence, uncovered the conspiracy, and brought justice to a place where it had been corrupted, beyond recognition. The crowd was still shouting, the chaos still swirling around us. But in that moment, with Duke's warm body pressed against mine, I felt a peace I hadn't known since the robbery. The truth had won. Justice had prevailed. Not because of legal maneuvering or clever arguments, but because a well-trained dog had followed his nose and trusted his instincts. If you've been following this incredible journey, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and share this story. Leave a comment telling us what this tale means to you. These stories of courage, loyalty, and justice need to be preserved and shared. Your engagement helps keep the spirit of the Old West alive for future generations. Carson the bailiff was still examining the area behind the judge's bench. He called out, "There's more here. A ledger book." William Price took custody of it immediately, recognizing its potential importance. As the courthouse slowly emptied, people filing out to spread the news, to process what they'd witnessed, William, Sheriff Morrison, and I gathered in the judge's chambers to examine what Carson had found. The ledger was damning. Page after page documented Judge Blackwood's corruption over the past 7 years. Bribes received, trials fixed, evidence suppressed. He'd been running Old Mesa County like a personal fiefdom, enriching himself while perverting every principle of justice. "Look at this," William said, pointing to an entry from 3 months earlier. He took $1,000 from the Copper Creek Mining Company to rule against homesteaders in a water rights case. Those families lost everything. Morrison flipped through more pages. Here's a list of attorneys he worked with. Thorne's name appears a dozen times. They'd been partners for years, splitting the proceeds from fixed cases. But the most damning evidence was near the back of the ledger, detailed plans for the Wells Fargo robbery. Blackwood had been the mastermind, using his position to learn about gold shipments. He'd recruited Thorne and 4 others, all men with military backgrounds, all in Blackwood's debt for various legal favors. They'd planned the robbery meticulously, choosing Copper Ridge Pass for its isolation, timing the attack perfectly, and they'd specifically requested me as the escort. Not despite my reputation, but because of it. They needed someone respectable to take the fall, someone whose conviction would close the investigation quickly. I'd been set up from the beginning, chosen as the scapegoat before the crime even occurred. Why hide the gold in the courthouse, William wondered. Why not take it somewhere remote? Arrogance, I said. Blackwood thought he was untouchable. Hiding the gold right under everyone's noses, literally beneath his own chair, proved how powerful he was. No one would dare search a judge's courtroom. And if the gold was close, he could monitor it personally. Morrison shook his head in disgust. How many lives did he ruin? How many innocent people did he send to prison? Too many, I said. But now we can start to fix it. Every case he presided over needs to be reviewed. Every conviction questioned. It'll take months, maybe years, but we owe it to those people to make it right. The investigation that followed lasted 6 months and uncovered a conspiracy that extended far beyond Blackwood and Thorne. The 4 other men involved in the robbery were tracked down and arrested. 2 were former cavalry officers. Blackwood had defended in court-martial proceedings. 1 was a deputy marshal from another district who'd been on Blackwood's payroll for years. The 4th was a professional gunman who'd done enforcement work for the judge's various schemes. All of them were tried, convicted, and sentenced to federal prison. Blackwood and Thorne received the harshest sentences, 20 years each, to be served in Kansas, where they'd be far from any remaining influence or allies. The gold was returned to its rightful owners. Families who'd lost their savings wept with relief. The mining operations that had funded the ore were compensated. Wells Fargo issued a public apology to me and offered a substantial reward, which I donated to a fund for widows and orphans of lawmen killed in the line of duty. But more important than the money was the systemic reform that followed. The territorial governor appointed a special commission to review every case Blackwood had presided over. 37 convictions were overturned. 14 innocent people were released from prison. Countless civil cases were reopened and decided fairly. The process was slow and painful, but necessary. I was cleared of all charges, naturally. My reputation was restored, enhanced even by the ordeal. The newspapers called me the incorruptible Marshal Kane. The territorial governor personally apologized and offered me a position as a federal marshal with expanded jurisdiction. I accepted, knowing that there were other corrupt towns, other officials like Blackwood who needed to be brought to justice. But the real hero of the story was Duke. The newspapers called him the dog detective who brought down a judge. They wrote feature stories about his training, his career, his brave actions during the robbery and the trial. Children throughout the territory wanted police dogs like Duke. Other law enforcement agencies inquired about training programs. The territorial government, recognizing Duke's contribution, commissioned a special badge for him, silver, with Deputy Duke engraved on it. It was presented at a ceremony in Santa Fe, with the governor himself placing it on Duke's collar. My partner sat with perfect dignity through the entire proceeding, accepting the recognition as if he'd always known it was coming. But Duke hadn't changed. He was still the same loyal, dedicated, duty-driven partner he'd always been. Fame meant nothing to him. Recognition was irrelevant. What mattered was the work, tracking criminals, finding evidence, protecting the innocent, serving justice. We continued working together for 2 more years after the trial. Every morning, Duke would wait by the door, ready for whatever the day would bring. Every night he'd sleep beside my bed, one ear always alert for danger. We traveled thousands of miles across the Western Territories, taking cases that local lawmen couldn't solve. We tracked the Martinez gang through Arizona, finding them holed up in a canyon where they thought no one could follow. We recovered stolen property worth $20,000 from a warehouse in El Paso. We found a missing girl in the mountains of Colorado, just like that first case all those years ago. Duke following her scent through terrain that would have defeated any human tracker. But time catches everyone, even the most dedicated deputy. Duke began to slow down. His muzzle went gray. His joints stiffened with arthritis. The long rides became harder for him. I could see in his eyes that his spirit was still willing, but his body was wearing out. On a cold morning in January 1886, Duke couldn't get up. His back legs had finally given out, the cumulative effect of years of hard service. I carried him to the veterinarian in Santa Fe, knowing what I would hear but desperate to avoid it. The vet examined Duke carefully, professionally, but I could see the sympathy in his eyes. His spine is deteriorating. The nerves are compressed. He's in constant pain. I can give him something for that, but it would only delay the inevitable. And it wouldn't be fair to him, Marshall. Not to a working dog who's lived his whole life with dignity and purpose. I knew he was right. I'd known for weeks, really. But accepting it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Duke had been my partner for 14 years. He'd saved my life repeatedly. He'd found justice when human efforts had failed. He was more than a dog. He was my brother in every way that mattered. I took Duke home one last time. My wife Sarah prepared his favorite meal, steak, cooked rare, the way he loved it. Our son, now 5 years old, sat with Duke for hours, stroking his fur, telling him stories. Duke's tail thumped weakly against the floor, his eyes warm with the simple contentment of being with his family. That night I sat on the porch with Duke's head in my lap, looking out at the stars scattered across the New Mexico sky. The winter air was crisp and clear, the kind of night that makes you believe in eternity. "You changed my life, old friend," I told him, scratching behind his ears the way he'd always loved. "That day in the courtroom, you saved more than my reputation. You reminded me what justice looks like. Pure, uncomplicated, true." Duke's tail thumped once against the wooden planks. "You were the best partner a lawman could ask for, the bravest deputy I ever served with. And I want you to know, everything good I accomplished, every life we saved, every criminal we brought to justice, none of it would have been possible without you." He looked up at me with those wise amber eyes, and I swear he understood every word. In that look, I saw 14 years of partnership, thousands of miles traveled together, countless moments of danger faced and overcome, the absolute trust and loyalty that had defined our relationship. The next morning, with Sarah and our son beside me, I held Duke while the veterinarian administered the medication that would end his pain. Duke never struggled. He trusted me completely even in this final moment. His eyes stayed locked on mine until they slowly closed, and his breathing became shallow, then stopped. We buried him on a hillside overlooking Santa Fe, in a spot where the sun rises every morning and sets every evening, where wildflowers bloom in the spring and snow falls soft in winter. The territorial governor attended the funeral. So did 43 lawmen whose lives Duke had saved or whose cases he'd helped solve. We stood on that hillside, these hardened men of the West, and we wept for a dog who'd been more than a dog. The headstone was simple, but honest. Duke, Deputy and Hero, 1871-1886. He served justice without fear. I continued serving as a federal marshal for another 12 years after Duke passed. I had other dogs, other partners, and they were all good and loyal. But there was only one Duke. Only one partner who could find gold hidden beneath a corrupt judge's chair. Only one deputy whose courage and instinct had restored my faith in justice when I'd been ready to lose it. The old Mesa County Courthouse still stands today, preserved as a historical landmark. Tourists visit to see where the famous gold discovery happened. There's a plaque commemorating the event, with Duke's portrait prominently displayed. The exact spot where he sat, indicating his find, is marked with a brass plate set into the floor. Children press their faces against the glass case containing Duke's badge, the special silver one the governor commissioned, engraved with Deputy Duke. They ask their parents about the dog who brought down a corrupt judge. The story has been told and retold across generations, each version adding new details, new drama. But I was there. I lived it. And I can tell you the truth is simpler and more profound than any embellished legend. Duke was a trained police dog who did his job. He followed a scent, indicated a find, and remained faithful to his duty despite threats and mockery. He didn't understand courtroom politics or judicial corruption. He understood right from wrong at a basic instinctive level. And sometimes that's exactly what justice needs. Someone or something that can't be swayed by power or intimidated by authority. Someone whose moral compass points true north regardless of consequence. Someone whose loyalty is absolute and whose courage is unshakable. The West was brutal. It demanded everything from those who sought to bring order to chaos. It required courage beyond measure, determination that wouldn't bend, resilience that couldn't be broken. It needed people willing to stand alone when everyone else sat down, to fight for truth when lies were easier, to sacrifice comfort for principle. But it also needed dogs like Duke, partners who could see through human complexity to basic truth, companions whose instincts were unclouded by greed or ambition, deputies whose only motivation was duty and whose only reward was knowing they'd done their job well. The lesson I carried from that dusty courtroom into every remaining day of my career was this: justice isn't a building or a title or a piece of paper. Justice is action. It's the refusal to accept corruption simply because it's comfortable or profitable. It's standing alone when everyone else sits down. It's trusting your partner, even when that partner has 4 legs and can't speak a word of English. Duke understood justice in a way that transcended human complexity. For him, right and wrong weren't shades of gray. They were scents on the wind, clear and distinct. Corruption had a smell. Truth had a smell. And when he sat down behind that judge's bench, he was simply doing what he'd been trained to do. Find what was hidden and bring it to light. I'm an old man now, retired from active duty, living out my days in the house I built in Santa Fe. My son followed me into law enforcement, and he tells his own children about the grandfather they never met, the legendary Deputy Duke who changed the course of justice in the New Mexico Territory. Sometimes on quiet evenings I walk up to that hillside where Duke rests. I sit by his grave and tell him about the world he left behind, how the territories became states, how the wild frontier became civilized, how the principles we fought for, honest justice, equal treatment under law, the courage to stand against corruption, became the foundation of something bigger than ourselves. And I thank him for the partnership, for the loyalty, for showing me that justice doesn't require complexity. It just requires courage and an unwavering commitment to truth. The sun is setting now, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of orange and purple. The wind carries the scent of sage and dust, the same smells that filled that courthouse on the day everything changed. And if I close my eyes, I can almost feel Duke beside me, his warm presence, his steady breathing, his absolute certainty that together we could face anything. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you something. Take a moment to reflect on what this tale means to you. Have you ever had to stand up against corruption? Have you ever had a partnership built on pure trust and loyalty? Have you ever witnessed the moment when truth finally surfaces after being buried in lies? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to this channel to hear more stories of courage, justice, and loyalty from the American West. These tales aren't just about the past. They're about timeless principles that matter just as much today as they did in 1883. The West was won by ordinary people who did extraordinary things, by lawmen who wouldn't quit, by dogs who followed their training even when judges laughed at them, by anyone who refused to accept that might makes right, that power excuses corruption, that the innocent should suffer so the guilty can prosper. That's the legacy of that dusty day in the old Mesa County Courthouse. Not the gold, not the dramatic revelation, but the simple truth that justice requires courage, persistence, and loyalty. Those virtues built the West. They built America. And they remain just as essential in whatever trials we face today. Duke's story reminds us that heroes come in all forms. Sometimes they wear badges and carry guns. Sometimes they have 4 legs and communicate with amber eyes instead of words. But always, always they share certain traits: unwavering dedication to duty, courage in the face of danger, loyalty that never falters, and an instinctive understanding of right and wrong that no amount of corruption can obscure. So when you face your own injustices, when you're wrongly accused, when corruption seems insurmountable, remember Duke. Remember a dog who sat patiently behind a judge's bench, indicating truth while everyone around him argued about lies. Remember that persistence and courage and loyalty can overcome even the most entrenched corruption. Find yourself a partner you trust completely, be it human, canine, or simply your own unshakable moral compass. Stand firm in your principles. Never compromise on truth. And when you find what you're looking for, sit down and wait patiently for others to notice what you've discovered. Because that's what good deputies do. They serve, they protect, they never give up on justice. Even when that deputy has 4 legs and fur the color of dark honey touched by sunlight. Especially then. The West is gone now, transformed into highways and cities and modern civilization. The dusty courthouses have been replaced by air-conditioned judicial centers. The desperate frontier towns have become thriving communities. The lawless territories have become ordered states. But the principles remain. Justice still requires courage. Truth still demands persistence. Loyalty still builds partnerships that can accomplish the impossible. And sometimes, in quiet moments, if you listen carefully, you can still hear the echo of boot heels and dog claws on wooden courthouse floors, the sound of a deputy and his partner walking together toward truth, toward justice, toward redemption. Thank you for staying with this story from beginning to end. Thank you for caring about Duke and his legacy. Thank you for believing that one dog, one lawman, and one moment of courage can change everything. Subscribe to keep these stories alive. Comment to share your own experiences with loyalty, justice, and courage. And remember, the spirit of the Old West lives on in everyone who refuses to accept corruption, who stands for truth and who never ever gives up on justice. Duke would be proud of that. I know I am. The sun has set now, leaving only stars scattered across the vast New Mexico sky. Up on that hillside, a simple headstone stands eternal watch over the valley below. And somewhere in the great mystery beyond this life, I believe Duke is still on duty. Still tracking truth. Still sitting patiently when he finds it, waiting for someone brave enough to notice what he's discovered. Because that's what good deputies do. They serve justice without fear. They remain loyal without question. They find truth without compromise. And they never, ever stop being the partner you need, exactly when you need them most. That was Duke. That is his legacy. And that is why his story deserves to be told, remembered, and passed down through generations. Not as legend, but as truth. The truth of what one extraordinary partnership accomplished in a dusty courthouse in 1883, when corruption seemed invincible and justice seemed lost. Until a dog sat down behind a judge's chair and changed everything. Rest well, Duke. Your duty is done. And it was done with honor, courage, and a loyalty that time can never diminish. You were, and always will be, the finest deputy I ever served with, the truest partner I ever knew, the greatest hero the West never fully appreciated until it was too late. But I appreciated you. Every single day, and I always will. Justice served. Truth discovered. Loyalty rewarded. The end of the story, but never the end of what it means. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for keeping the spirit of the Old West, and the spirit of Deputy Duke, alive in your hearts.